Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Alex Bombeck joining us. Alex, welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, really excited to have you on here and for us to dive into this. So, for those who don't know you, Alex, explain what you do.
Sure. I am a president and managing director at a worldwide consulting firm called North Highland.
Awesome. Now, how long have you been at North Highland for?
I've been at North Highland for 4 years this month, actually.
Congratulations. That's a nice celebration then. Let's go back. Before you became president and managing partner at North Highland, what were you doing?
Sure. So before moving my family down to Atlanta for the job here at North Highland's headquarters, I was living in Connecticut and working in Manhattan, where I'd worked for 22 years. And my last job in Manhattan, I was the chief digital officer of a global communications agency called Havas Worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely know the name. And how did you get into that? Let's go back as far as we can out of school. Did you get right into kind of the media advertising space, or did you have a couple of different jobs before you got there?
Well, I think like anybody, I had the proverbial waiting tables job as I was looking to get my first job, but I'd always targeted marketing and advertising out of school. That was what I went to school for. That was my degree at business school, was with a focus in marketing. So I had a pretty good idea I wanted to go and join an ad agency. My first job was as a media planner. And that was the easiest route in and gave me a pretty good perspective into the media side of the business. Of course, that side was very, very different back then. It was limited to out-of-home, radio, broadcast, print, and newspapers were about all the channels you had. So nothing like it looks like today, but an early entree, particularly into the data and analytics side of the business, because most of that was really, it was just a data and analytics exercise for the most part, because on the media planning side, you weren't very involved in the creative. And then shortly thereafter, the folks on the account management side, if anybody's watched Mad Men, even though it was the early 90s, in large, it really wasn't terribly different from what you saw in Mad Men in almost every way. They're the media folks and the account folks and all the crazy people that were in the show as well. And the folks on the account management side said, no, you'd be better suited to help us over here. So I spent a few years on the account management side of the business before being lured by an old boss into helping him start up an interactive division of global promotions agency. And that was in 1995. And not long after, as we kid about here in the States, Al Gore invented the internet, and it first sort of took a foothold as being something that brands and marketers were considering as a way to reach their audiences. And I sat in a meeting with a client before leaving to go join this gentleman, and the CMO of a global rental car company asked our managing director at the time on the account what our plan was around helping them with these banner things and otherwise. And everybody sort of looked at each other, and I just raised my hand and said, I'll figure it out. Because frankly, at that point in time, there was so little known about digital and interactive that whoever got up first that morning and read whatever had been published that morning tended to be the smartest person in the room on the topic, because there really wasn't that much to know. And it was just one big game of experimentation and creativity on how to apply this new technology and manners to engage these organizations, audiences, or their own employees. At that point, that was my first foray into what I would consider to be more of a consultative type of relationship with clients, even though in the media days, we were still consulting in that we were providing them with advice and strategic direction on how to spend their media dollars. This was more of we've got an opportunity or a challenge, and how do you apply these new tools and new technologies in a creative way to help them advance their business. And so really beginning in 1995, even though I, for almost 15, 17 years after that, have almost exclusively worked in the digital and technology space of communications, it was all very much akin to consulting, because it was about driving strategy. It was about people, process, and technology. It was about rethinking how clients went to market and how they would take advantage of new opportunities or new competition that was being thrown in their way as their competitors figured out how to leverage digital and technology to their advantage. So fast forward then, in 1999, I joined Havas in what have predecessor agencies, because of course, in that world, people are buying and merging and acquiring all the time. I would always laugh that it was never good to have had me work at one of your agencies, because I worked early on at Backer Spielvogel Bates, which then disappeared off the face of the planet. I then worked at Ammirati Pierce Lintos, which then disappeared off the planet, which was a surprise because in its heyday, it was sort of the top, and then went on to go work at eventually what is now Havas Worldwide, and worked there for 15 years. And
Alex, one thing that's very interesting, when I looked at your kind of rise to the top, you had, it looks like a very clear path to pretty senior levels within an organization. Was it a smooth path, or did you ever encounter some real challenges along the way as you were working to kind of climb that ladder?
I think there are always, the challenges you face are typically in numbers, right? So when I was in the traditional advertising business, one of the reasons I jumped over to the digital side was not because it was some big sexy thing that everybody wanted to be a part of, because nobody really, I think at that point, people were still questioning whether it was going to be a thing or not.
Right.
What I did know is that being one of 3,000 people competing for that next promotion, those are your odds. And the game became incredibly political, and not always the people that rose to the top were those that were necessarily the best positioned to drive success. And so through my career, I've constantly looked at where do my skills and where do my value add the most to the organization. And because of who I am, I would often look to new areas and to new ways to do that versus trying to compete for something that is already being done by other people. I think if you look at the positions I've had, in some cases, they were either positions that hadn't been created yet, and there was a need for somebody to come and lead that part of the organization, or I came into the position because I was bringing something new to it that hadn't been there before. And so barriers in this business often come in the form of competition and sort of reinventing yourself, I think. How do you continually retool, reskill yourself so that you have something that everybody around you doesn't have?
I think that's a really important point. And for most of our listeners who are consultants and running their own shop or playing a pretty integral role in a consulting firm, this applies just as much, right? Even if you're a solo consultant, having that mindset of always reinventing yourself, always looking at ways that you can improve and catch on to new best practices so you can provide a greater value to your clients and to the marketplace is really key. Would you say that applies now just as much to what you're doing when you're part of North Highland, where you have 3,000 consultants that are part of your company?
Yeah, I think it's probably the cornerstone to this business, as you just indicated, Michael. Really, the sole asset of any consulting firm are its people, right? The importance of its people being relevant to clients' needs at all points in time really is what differentiates you. We invest very heavily here at North Highland in our people and ensuring that their skills are up to date and relevant. And I think the other thing that's important when you look at skills is how you can bring people with different skills together so that they can offer a bespoke solution to a client that isn't all just developed with somebody that's done something 100 times, and offer the client a new way of doing that. I often refer to that as how you cast your team. And each team really needs to be cast in a way that's going to meet both the cultural needs of your client, the opportunity itself, because that's where you can differentiate yourself. Otherwise, you're coming in and really repeating something that's been done before, which is great. It's a best practice. But then when you're speaking to clients, it starts to feel very much like a sea of sameness, right? If you're not coming in and bringing a new view, a new lens, a new skill to the table, then that offering becomes a commodity pretty quickly.
Right. And speaking of clients, I think most people recognize the importance of building relationships. You've worked with many Fortune 500, Fortune 100 organizations. What have you found as the most effective way to actually build relationships with decision makers at Fortune 100 companies?
Know their culture. If you don't understand their culture and understand how decisions are made within their organization, and this may sound fairly trite, but influence doesn't always come from the top in every case. And so understanding the role that the different parts of the organization play in the decision-making process is critical. And I couldn't emphasize enough the importance of your relationship with a procurement organization or a supply chain organization, depending on where they position it at your client, because They may not be an ultimate decision maker, but it is understanding how they influence that process that's critical. And so depending on where you're at, the culture may be one where it's your immediate buyer. In other cases, it could be helping them understand how they're going to be able to leverage the work you do for them outside of their immediate organization. Some clients are heavily driven by grassroots types of initiatives. And so being able to share that with the buyer, if you will, and help them understand how they're going to be able to use the work you do for them and market it out from there can be critical. So if you don't understand that and you're approaching it exclusively from a pure value to that one person and not understanding how their ecosystem works out around them, it becomes very difficult.
How do you identify who to connect with, who to build a relationship within an organization? Let's just take kind of a hypothetical ideal client that you want to win business from. How do you first go about identifying who you should reach out to, who you should build that relationship with?
I've always operated from the perspective of my job. Our job as a consulting firm is to help our clients be successful, to make them successful in whatever way they are measured. And so if it is not clear to me how we are going to help the person that we are targeting, right? If there's no clear path to what success looks like, then it's probably not the right person to be working with, because once you can identify what successful looks like for that individual and then understand your role in enabling it, it makes the discussion fairly straightforward from that point, because they understand how you're going to help them meet their objectives. If you're having to convince somebody that you have a creative value to what they're trying to achieve, then the discussions become far more complicated. It's you having to constantly convince them as opposed to them seeing you as an asset or a catalyst towards them achieving success faster or greater success when it is achieved.
Really what I'm hearing you say is that you want to identify what's going on in the mind of that buyer and then ensure that you can provide value for them, help them in some way, as opposed to just taking your own methodology or your own ideas and trying to kind of ram them down the throat of a buyer and go through the whole education process. And educating buyers can take a lot longer than just finding out what it is that they're looking for help with or where they want to improve, and then figuring out how to position your offering in a way that it aligns and resonates with them. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And understanding their ask and how you might want to reshape it. I think the biggest trouble a consulting firm can get themselves into, or a consultant, is when you just do what the client has asked you to do because they've already determined it's the right answer.
Yeah.
And depending on the situation, it may be fairly straightforward, but I think getting into the head of the buyer and understanding what is motivating them and how they have come to ask for what they've asked is critical, because where you can be additive to them is to be able to help reshape the path forward. But at the end of the day, what we don't want to be doing as consultants is necessarily reinventing the wheel or turning every project into some sort of a custom project, right? Because we're an industry that is built off of best practices, repeatable patterns. As we say in marketing, there's only 5 real marketing strategies in the whole world, and everything is just some degree of variation off that. The reason is because there's 5 proven ways to market a brand. And so I think in consulting, you've got to find that blend between those repeatable, proven processes and approaches to doing work, and then understanding the nuances of that client, their culture, and how they're going to achieve success in blending those two together.
I think that's great advice. So you've identified a buyer within an organization where you really believe that you can add value to. What is working best and has worked best to then actually create an initial conversation with them? What's the best outreach approach or the best way to start dialogue? While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
My perspective was fairly different when I arrived at North Highland on this, or different, we'll say, than what I find in some consulting firms. And North Highland had a blend of this. But if you come from the communications world, from the agency world, you would never enter a meeting with a client without bringing them an idea. You know, you would do enough homework to be able to offer them at least a well thought through idea on how to help them drive their business forward based on what you understood their needs to be. And I think the same really needs to hold true in consulting, that you need to show up at that first meeting having done enough homework to be able to bring them a perspective to which they can react. Now, what I hear at some consulting firms or from some consultants is that's a little, you're out over your skis a little bit when you do that because you've not had a single conversation with them. And what if you come in with an idea and they either say, no, that won't work, or they've tried it before? And my response to that is, that's fine. The point of bringing them an idea is to demonstrate that you can think comprehensively about their industry, about their business, that you have some degree of understanding about them, and that you have actually brought forth something that demonstrates that. And even if it's wrong, they should recognize that if they've tried it before, it's probably because they did some homework and thought it was a good idea too. The fact it didn't work could have been due to something in their organization that you could never know about. And I think the sort of fear of rejection mantra that consultants have to live by is to be able to bring clients' ideas right out of the gate so they can understand the way you think and what it'd be like to work with you. If you show up to the first meeting and your plan is to do nothing but just ask them questions, then you haven't put yourself, your team, or your own brand forth in a way that allows them to understand your ability to think dynamically and creatively about their business.
Yeah, that's great. What would you say are some of the main challenges that consultants and consulting firms run up against when they're looking to work with Fortune 100 and kind of world-class organizations?
Well, there's an overall dynamic that's happening in the consulting industry and has been for the last couple of years relative to the way procurement has gotten engaged in the buying of consulting. And so one of the biggest challenges we face is on the rate side. So there's been incredible margin compression to the extent that procurement organizations have driven some of the work down to a level, frankly, where you're seeing staffing organizations competing to place people into, if it's role-based consulting, into those roles. And while it sounds good at the beginning, we're actually starting to see the pendulum swing back because a lot of inexperienced or not well qualified labor was being put into the consulting pool that was then turning out bad work, right? So we were literally fighting on price only. If you're fighting to win engagements, if you're trying to compete on price alone, then that is a very bad situation because that's not the way consulting should work, frankly. It should be a value exchange, not just a price war. I think that's a challenge. The other thing that is both challenging and very exciting for us is the way that all these industries on the professional services side are starting to blend together, and the recognition that you need a diverse set of skills to be able to solve for clients' problems. And that if you look at the agency side of the business and some of what they have to offer, particularly the IoT and digital space and what role that could play in solutions, that's a little bit different from what a consulting firm might have. And you're seeing this sort of race towards the ground where these two types of organizations both have a value proposition, but on their own, it's not as competitive. And so I saw an article the other day after an earnings release from one of the major marketing communications holding companies. And basically it went through all the reasons on why their share price had gone down and why they were taking a hit. And one of the comments that was made was the CEO, chairman of this holding company, had said, well, consulting companies continue to think that they're going to encroach on our business, and it's just not true. And the response was, actually, it is true, and they have encroached, and they're part of what's creating this problem for you. And I think the same thing holds true for the consulting firms, except they operate differently, right? They've recognized that the agencies are encroaching on their business and have been for a while. So they do quite the opposite. They go and buy agencies.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you look at the big four consulting firms, they've been on a buying spree now for a couple of years. I think Accenture has forecasted that it's going to spend $1.4 billion on acquisitions this year. While it's going to come in many different ways, shapes, and forms, a significant area of acquisition for them is this agency type space where they don't have or haven't had historically a large body of workforce. So the competition on one side is pricing. The competition on the other side is the diversity of skills that are required to go and drive effective solutions for clients these days.
Yeah, I think those are some really interesting areas and some very good points there, Alex. You mentioned pricing and the pressure from procurement. What are your suggestions to the consultant and firm owner that is in an organization where they've had a really good conversation with a senior level buyer, an executive in the company, and now their proposal has kind of gone to procurement, and the procurement person or people just really have no understanding of the value. They're just looking at the numbers and looking at it from a very different perspective, and now they're starting to get pressure. What's the best practice in your experience? What should a consultant do at that point?
I would start by saying, if you're a consultant and you're looking to create a partnership with your client that is based off of value exchange, then you need to avoid providing them with any scope of work or entering into a discussion that includes any reference to hours, time, or rates per hour, or rates based off of time.
Great advice.
The second you do that, you've put yourself squarely in the sights of procurement, and you put yourself squarely into a very easily assessed competitive set, right? Because now I can put your rate up to somebody else's rate, and I can compare amount of time, and it just takes the whole conversation down a really bad track. Which if you're a large consulting firm and you're talking about staffing 100 people or 200 people for months or years at a time, then it makes more sense because you don't always know what the work itself is going to be, and you sort of have to go down that path. But if you're a sole proprietor, a single consultant out there, or you've got a small firm and you're looking to engage a client, focus on the value exchange. Get creative in your pricing strategy. Look at risk reward type of options if you feel very strongly about your position. Gain share opportunities are always super exciting for consultants. So my advice would be, unless you are pressed into a time and materials discussion, avoid it at all costs until it becomes something that is unavoidable. If you're a large firm, as I said, that's different because you're at different sizes of agreements.
Right. And Alex, you're just getting a little bit quiet there and your sound coming through, but can you elaborate a little bit on the gain share opportunity and why that's so exciting for consultants?
Well, it's effectively putting your money where your mouth is, right? And it's getting to a scenario where if you believe so strongly in your skills and in the value that you can offer a client, and you've done your homework to the extent that your modeling and analytics are such that you believe you can make a demonstrable difference to their business, and they are willing to allow you to share in that benefit, the upside for a consultant typically is going to exceed any possible value-based or fixed fee pricing. The challenge will always be, it typically means that on the front end, you're working at cost. And so you have to be confident in your perspective. You have to understand clearly the attribution model related to the outcomes that you are forecasting. How much control do you have over them, making sure that you haven't entered into a gain share deal where you're only controlling a smaller portion of the variables, or they haven't been taken into account. So you really need to know what you're doing and have done the homework. And then from the client side, their fear of gain share, while they get super excited about it because they've got nothing to lose, if you will, if it doesn't work, right? Their fear tends to be, what if this thing is a runaway hit?
Right, yeah.
And all of a sudden they start doing the math and say, well, if your idea really works, then I could end up paying you, make it up, I could pay a 3-person team a couple $1 million. And the response is always like, right, but all you're doing is paying a share of the profit that I've created for you and a share that you felt my time and effort were worth. It's always a fun conversation because it's exciting to be in a gain share deal, but you call it, it's like Vegas money, right? You got to be prepared to go in with what you're going to lose because that's the odds you're playing. Right?
Yeah, I always talk to consultants who ask questions about taking on equity and tell them stories about my early days consulting where I have a drawer full of papers that have hundreds of thousands of shares on them and we're supposed to be worth millions of dollars and they're worth what the paper is. So you certainly have to be careful and be very selective in those deals. But you're right, the opportunity is pretty extraordinary if everything aligns. And so there are certain criteria that people should be careful about when they're entering into those, but done properly are very exciting. Alex, you are running and playing a role in managing 3,000 staff, I believe, 60 offices or so around the world. That sounds probably to a lot of our listeners like it's pretty hectic, to put it mildly. How do you balance and manage all of that?
Well, I think for one point of clarity, we do have 3,000 people and 60 plus offices as part of our Cordance Worldwide Network, which is North Highland is the chair consulting firm, if you will, as part of this consortium of firms called Cordance Worldwide. And that represents the 3,000 consultants and 60 plus offices. North Highland itself is probably closer to about 18 or 1,900 consultants, and we have 24 offices. Globally.
Okay, so a little bit less, but still sizable for most people, yeah. So how do you manage all that? Is it all about systems? Is it people? What does your life look like when you're at that level, managing that number of consultants and offices?
Yeah. First of all, you've got to have a small-ish group of absolutely terrific leaders. You've got to have a core senior leadership team that you can trust and depend on without having to always be engaged with them on a daily or weekly basis and know that they're making the right decisions on behalf of the firm. That's something that we've worked very hard on, and I trust those people implicitly, but it's important that you don't have too many of them. I talk to some of my colleagues at other firms, and they say, I'm getting my direct reports together, and they talk about having 14, 15 people. Well, that's not terribly reasonable, and I think it's important that you always have an immediate group of people that you can get together with that is in the single digits if you're going to be successful. You mentioned systems. Systems to me are absolutely a prerequisite to being able to handle anything at scale. When we look at firms that approach us about wanting to be acquired, or you look at your average consulting firm that gets to be $10 to $20 million and they start to struggle. Most of those struggles come in two shapes. One, simply their size starts to place them out of certain deals because the buyers are nervous about going with somebody that's too small. The second always tends to be the systems, right? You hit a critical point of inflection where you can no longer be organized nor efficient or understand where you might be experiencing leakage or margin erosion in your system. And so for me, the system is critical because it allows me to quickly know who to talk to and what I should be talking to them about. And that even holds true for my immediate direct reports. They're managing anywhere from 50 to $100 million worth of business. And so I could sit and talk to them all day, every day about things that are going on with them and their teams. But that's not effective. But because we've got systems in place, both from an HCM perspective, PSA, et cetera, and then a plug for Salesforce, I have an efficient conversation with them about which accounts, about which teams that are under them. And so we can be very efficient with our time because I need to be able to spend more of my time with my clients and helping to drive value there than working on internal operations. And I think that's probably an important point to make. In my position in some organizations, when you get to my level, it becomes a very internal or operational kind of role with meetings. You meet with the people who meet with clients, but you don't always spend as much time with clients. My focus, the reason I've been in this business for more than 25 years is because of my passion for being with clients and working. And I think it's critical that no matter what level you are at in a consulting firm, that you maintain that sort of activity in the field, if you will. It helps you understand the dynamic of what's actually going on out there. It informs you of the challenges that your teams are facing. It also helps you understand how the systems that you're enabling with are actually helping them do their jobs better or not.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what we need to do is create an environment where our people can spend as much time as possible with clients, helping drive value for them and not caught up in systems and administration. And so for us, the systems are designed to help create that balance between client-facing time and management of the business time.
Great advice, Alex. I've really been enjoying this conversation. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing a bit of your journey, your wisdom and experience. What's the best way for people to reach out to learn more about your work and to connect with you?
I'm a very digital guy, so I'm on LinkedIn regularly. You can find my profile there, and if you message me via LinkedIn, I will be sure to respond in a prompt manner.
Awesome. Again, Alex, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. Enjoyed the time today.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.